Grief is the normal and natural reaction to loss of any kind. Grief is also then the conflicting feelings we experience when there's an end of or a change in a familiar pattern of behavior. I want the church to be a place where the brokenhearted can come, broken down, discovering that my partner has betrayed me, and I can come there and I can fall on my knees and cry and just be like, cool, that's normal, that's good.
Yeah.
God is meeting her in that place.
Grief can take care of itself, but to get the full value of joy, you must have somebody to divide it with. Mark Twain.
Oh, Mark. Such a wise man.
Or is he?
I don't know. Probably not. I don't know. But it is a wise quote.
It is.
Do you agree
I see
with
where
it?
he's going.
Yeah.
I see where he's going there. I absolutely believe the second half that we need to get the full value of joy. You must have somebody to divide it with. Joy is definitely so much better experienced with your people,
Yes.
right? With others. But the first part, grief can take care of itself. I understand what he's saying. But on today's podcast, we have a lovely grief coach on. She's delightful, and she highlighted quite a bit. We had a great conversation about how we really do need community.
Yeah.
Grief is deep. It's personal. It's unique. It's within ourselves. But isolation can be dangerous.
Absolutely.
Can be harmful.
Yeah. Our guest today is Hannah Wachter. Wow, what a delightful person she is. I mean, she's been through grief. She clearly understands it. She's been trained on the subject. She walks others through their own grief process. And she's definitely one of those people that after listening to the podcast, we're going to want to have back on, because I think she has a lot more to share with us. And we have a lot more to learn from her. I don't know about you. I mean, we all know if you've been through betrayal, you understand grief in a way that many won't ever. I often describe it as a feeling of something trying to claw its way out of your body.
That's
It
so
is
well said.
It's such a visceral experience. So on today's podcast, we have Hannah that is sharing what it looks like to go through this and to go through it in healthy ways. If you're familiar with grief and you've maybe been through some of your own and processed a lot and feel like you know a lot about it, I would encourage you to actually listen to this, because as someone who is also familiar with grief and has gone through it and has, worked on it, I feel like I learned a lot today.
Oh gosh.
And
Yeah.
this podcast is very lighthearted. She's a wonderful woman who is just so delightful.
She is. I think when we were done recording, I used the adjective delicious.
Yes, she is.
I just want to eat her with a spoon. She never stopped smiling. Her eyes sparkle. She is
Mhm.
also a worship leader. She loves the Lord. She embodies what I imagine when the scripture talks about fullness of joy.
Yeah.
And it's really encouraging to me to know that she grieved so deeply because she lost her mother, which was her person, her best friend in the whole wide world. And she processed her grief in a healthy way. So it was encouraging to me to see that she could go through something so devastating. And we're all going to have those moments of devastation and loss in our lives, and yet come out of that having processed grief well and being able to embody joy. That's so promising for the rest of us. Enjoy today's episode, friends.
Welcome to the Betrayal Recovery Transformation Podcast, your place to reclaim your life after betrayal. My name is Jen Howie.
Hi, friends. My name is Chris Rocha, and on today's podcast, we have Hannah Wachter. Her website says she's a warm cup of tea for your grieving heart, and if that doesn't sum her up perfectly, I have no idea what would. She's such a delight, and we're so excited for you to meet her.
Yes, Hannah has been coaching, encouraging, and building others up for more than 14 years. She's done it with kindness and clarity, and she helps others turn their pain into purpose by cultivating healthy growth and better navigating change. In essence, Hannah helps you recover and discover, empowering you to be your very best self. As a seminarian turned makeup artist turned coach, Hannah has served as a gentle hand on your back encouraging you to step forward, look in the mirror, and see what others see in you. She's a gifted writer and speaker and a singer, worship leader, and is determined to use her voice to help others know and believe their value and worth.
Well said. Welcome, Hannah, to the podcast. Thank you so much for carving out some time out of your busy schedule and being with us today.
Oh my goodness. I am so honored to be here and just to share my heart and be hopefully a source of encouragement to anybody listening. So thanks for inviting me.
So, Hannah, would you just help our guests get to know you a little bit better? Tell us about yourself, how you became a grief coach, and a little bit about what you do for fun.
Oh, absolutely. Let's see. So, Hannah Wachter. I live in Happy Valley, Oregon, right outside of Portland. I'm a wife and I'm a stepmom to 4 kids, and I actually have 2 grandkids, believe it or not.
Wow.
Yeah, it's super fun to play with them.
You are the most beautiful, youngest looking grandmother ever. Wow. Okay, sorry. You too, Jen.
Yeah,
you too.
Yeah.
Listeners didn't see, but I made a face of Chris. Like, wait a second.
You're like, hold up.
Cheers to grandparenting.
Hold
Yes,
up. That's
cheers.
right. That's right. It is so much fun. Let's see. I'll first share what I love to do for fun. So when I'm working out, I love to go for walks and I kickbox, and that is super fun for me. And then, I don't know. I just love hanging out with people, but I'm a big reader. I love to read. I'm into murder mysteries and things like that. So I read all those kinds of stuff. So that's like some stuff I do for fun. But I originally grew up in Washington, D.C., and I grew up in an abusive home. And that was really the impetus for me moving out here in my early 20s. I just was like, I need to get away. I need to make a clean break. I think somewhere along the line as a child, I decided that instead of being a hurt person who hurt people, I wanted to be a healed person who healed people. And so I've always been on this healing journey and trying to not live out of my wounds, find healing and hope for myself so that I could offer that to other people. And so that eventually, through many different pathways, like you said, I've been to seminary, and then I was a makeup artist for a while, but my goal has always been to speak into people's hearts and lives. And so eventually I felt God just saying, you know what, I have more for you. And so I stepped into full-time coaching about 3 to 4 years ago, and I absolutely love it. It's super rewarding for me. And then how I became a grief coach is simply because my mom died very suddenly, very unexpectedly about a year and a half ago. And I am a very open person and I have a very open social media profile. And so, like most things, I was like, well, I'm just going to jump on and talk about it. And I'm just going to process my grief here in this space. And I found myself getting one or two different kinds of responses from people. The first response was either that people were really well meaning and wanted to say the right thing, but they ended up saying things that were really hurtful and painful and kind of compounded the grief or made me angry because I felt they were insensitive or just they kind of just really missed the mark. So that was one type of response. And then the other response I was getting from people was, wow, you articulating your journey, your grief journey, and your experience is really helping me heal. It's really therapeutic for me. I've never been able to process the loss of my brother in 7 years because I've never had a safe space to share some of the things, and you're sharing them, and it's helping me. And so all of that just really stirred me up, and I was like, I think we need to do better with each other, especially when it comes to grief. We just lived through a pandemic and we're still not comfortable with talking about grief and loss, and that was very confusing to me. I made a button right after my mom died, probably a month or two after my mom died. I'll show it to you. It says, please be gentle with me, I'm grieving. And I wore it. I wore it everywhere I went because we don't wear black anymore, right? And I feel like the tradition of wearing black was so important because it was a signifier to people that, hey, that person just went through something hard. I need to be gentle with them. I need to be tender. I need to maybe lower my expectations a little bit. And so I wore that around, and I can't even begin to tell you the beautiful responses I'd get from people like the barista or whatever. It was just amazing. But someone at my kickboxing studio saw that I had that button, and then she approached me about the grief recovery method. And I didn't know what it was, but I looked into it. And when I got the book and read it, I was like, this is it. This is the educational tool and the safe space that I think people really are looking for but aren't aware of. And I want to get certified in this, and I want to help people find this tool and have this education so that we can be better with each other as we walk through grief, because grief is going to find us, all of us. So we need to do a little better.
Wow. Okay. I'm just
Are you a little gobsmacked right now?
Well, you had the advantage of meeting Hannah before I did. So this is actually my first time meeting her. And I just there were so many thoughts that were going through my mind. The button, I'm like, I want that button. And then realized that my first question that came to mind is like, where do I get the button?
Right.
There is something really beautiful about that. You're right. Back in the day, everyone wore black, and you wore it for a long period of time.
Yeah.
And I never even honestly even stopped to think about why people wore black. I wear black all the time.
Right.
People probably think people don't think I'm grieving, but that button, how beautiful, how differently would I encounter somebody if I just took into a moment to consider what they're experiencing. And it, as a recovering betrayed spouse, that would feel a little like it's bringing attention to me. But at the same time, man, I could have really used a kind response.
Yeah.
During that time. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. First of all, now I'm thinking about the button, because you're not the first person who's been like, where can I get that?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Can you
why
please
aren't
do a
you selling
Shopify,
that?
Hannah?
Yes. And I do want to say that that is like my goal in the next month, to get that up and running for people, because I've had so many people ask me for that. But Jen, I love what you're saying, because I think when people would read something like that, they instantly would assume like, oh, who did you lose or whatever. I mean, people also wanted to tell me about their grief. They'd ask me,
Oh, wow.
but then they'd also want to tell me about their grief after the button. But that makes me think about what would be something that as a woman, as a person going through betrayal trauma, what would be something that would be like, hey, a signifier, I need you to be gentle with me, or even what's the answer to give? Like, even if it was, please be gentle with me, I'm grieving, honoring the space that, I lost I thought my marriage was this way and it wasn't this way. And this really hurts and I'm grieving this.
Yeah. Yeah. Even a button that says, I could use some kindness today.
Oh, yeah.
You guys, this reminds me, I was getting ready to be empty nested, and I was unexpectedly unemotional. 5 kids. It was the 4th of 5 that that was leaving the house. And I was so disappointed in myself that I was sat there so emotional. My husband goes, let's just go to coffee. So we go to coffee, and we're sitting at the coffee shop. And earlier that day, I had just had gone to the doctor. And so I'm sitting at this coffee shop processing with my husband. I'm grieving with my husband. I'm like, the tears are coming down. I'm not like blubbering, but I'm, I've got tears just streaming down my face, and strangers are being so kind. I had one lady just come up and put her hand on my back. I had all these kind smiles. And then I realized, I looked down at my arm. I forgot that at the doctor, I'd had my blood drawn that day. And it became pretty clear pretty fast that people thought that maybe I was having a bad diagnosis, or something like that, like something was medically wrong. I got bad medical news. And no, it was just a mom who was grieving the fact that her child was leaving the nest and she wasn't handling it well. But I do find that people really do want to step into our grief if we give them the opportunity, if we want them to. So, Hannah, can you explain exactly what grief is? Can you sort of define what that is? I mean, was I grieving when my son was leaving the empty nest? I don't know. Not compared to the grief I had when my mom died or when my husband, cheated or whatever. But still, grief exists. So can you maybe sort of define that for us in the context of what we're talking about today?
Absolutely, I would love to. So I'm going to give two different definitions, and the second definition will speak to the empty nesting, I think, a little bit. But first, I'll say that grief is the normal and natural reaction to loss of any kind,
Mm,
right? So actually, I'm wrong. This also speaks to the empty nesting thing. I say any kind because it is really important to recognize that there's over 40 different types of life events that cause feelings of grief and loss. So it's
Wow.
not just death, even though people perceive it, grief to be primarily in that category. It's things like divorce, it's moving, it's infidelity, it's loss of health, it's loss of trust, it's loss of safety. I think, for me as a kid growing up abused, I grieved the loss of safety before I even actually understood that that was what it was, but it was that. And so there's so many different life events that stir up feelings of grief and loss. And so grief is just the normal and natural reaction to a loss of any kind. All of those feelings, those emotions, that profound depth of sadness is normal and natural. And it's grief is also then the conflicting feelings we experience when there's an end of or a change in a familiar pattern of behavior.
that's good.
So, especially with your son leaving the nest, it's like, wait, I have lived 16 to 18 years of life with you in this way, helping you, caring for you, and now you know in your heart of hearts and in your brain that yeah, you're always going to love him and he's going to come home and it's going to be great, but it'll never quite be the same as it
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
right? And so that is a familiar pattern of behavior changing, and that stirs up grief for us. That
Hmm.
stirs up sadness, and it's just that recognition that wow, my life was like this and now that's over. And that that makes me sad, and I'm grieving that. So again, it's like things like moving, it's death, but it could also be, when your partner no longer comes to you for sexual intimacy and you're like, why? And then you discover it's like there's, of course, that pattern of behavior is disrupted or the vow is disrupted, right? The commitment is disrupted. And so those feelings, of course, cause tons and tons of grief.
Thank you. We're big fans of the book The Body Keeps the Score.
Me too.
And
Me
are
too.
ya?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it's
love
such, I
it.
mean, it reads like a textbook. It's a heavy read, but it's so informative. And
Mhm.
so I'm a little bit curious about if you could teach us a bit about how does our body hold trauma, and
Mhm.
and why is it important for us to process grief? What happens
Yeah,
when we don't? What happens when we do?
totally. So there is a foundation called the American Brain Foundation, and there's a doctor there, Lisa Schulman, and she says that grief is just the normal protective process in our bodies. It's the grief process was an adaptive process that our brains went through to help us survive in the face of emotional trauma. So I believe that all grief has some element of trauma, whether it's big T trauma or little t trauma, whether it's a thousand, so in the sense that whether it's a thousand small little incidents that slowly over time just really debilitate us and paralyze us, or whether it's, that sudden act of your partner cheating or finding them, with all the porn or whatever, whether it's those big things or those little things, all grief has some element of trauma. So, and the brain interprets grief, I'm sorry, as emotional trauma or as PTSD. So our brain isn't saying, our synapses aren't like, oh, this is grief. No, the body and the brain are saying this is traumatic.
Mm.
I'm shutting down into a fight or flight response, or the fawning or the freezing, right? That you guys talk about. And so we go into just our normal stress responses when we're grieving. And that's the protective process, right? Those four F's are all about a protective response
Mhm.
ultimately. So I would say that initially a lot of grievers, when that first pang happens or that first event happens, a lot of grievers end up freezing in the sense that there's disbelief, there's shock, but then your brain kind of slows down. There's this term out there also called grief brain, and it's
Oh,
it's really where it's almost like a fog. It's like you're trying to walk through fog, but you can't see anything. You know what's right in front of you, but beyond that, your decision making ability doesn't work as well. You process information differently. memory retention recedes. Like, so it's hard to retain information and stuff. I remember when my mom died, my sister was like so diligent about writing everything down because she's like, I can't even remember what this person said an hour ago. So
Mm.
our body has this just natural response when it comes to grief. Now, society, I feel, teaches us to put a lid on our pain a lot of the time. So, and I said this in terms of loss and death, and I just think it gives a good example. But when we have a funeral, people expect, okay, well, you have the funeral, all right, like keep moving on, or like, okay, like your partner cheated, you divorce
Get
them,
over
okay,
it.
right,
Get over
move
it,
on.
right? You
Ugh,
put
I
put a
hate.
bow on it and move on. Yep.
Yes, like exactly, just move on. And that's such a lie, that doesn't work. And so we talk about in the grief recovery method, we talk about myths around grief. And one of those myths is, just be strong, don't feel bad, move on, just give it time. But all of these phrases actually teach us to suppress our grief. And when we suppress these emotions, our body takes the brunt of it. All of that pent up emotional energy has to go somewhere. So you have to imagine it sort of as like a pressure cooker scenario. I'm suppressing, 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 but the fire underneath is growing and growing and growing, but there's a lid on it. Well, we know what eventually is going to happen. It's going to explode everywhere in our life if we just continue to suppress our grief and our sorrow and our pain. And so, unresolved grief, especially in the body, it weakens the immune system.
Mm-hmm.
We know if we have a weak immune system, that will lead to illness and disease. Again, with that fight or flight response, our stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, they're raging constantly, and that's also suppressing the immune system. So if we're living in a heightened state of grief, which is a heightened stress response, it's just a constant, like a chronic fight or flight state, which is not good for our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Inflammation, ulcers, high blood pressure, headaches, these are all things that also happen when we are not processing our grief. Unprocessed grief or grief in general too, just it disrupts our sleep. It's hard to sleep, or sometimes we oversleep, like depression, like trending towards depression. But we know that lack of a healthy sleep cycle also weakens our body. And we know that when people are grieving, it's hard to eat even sometimes. It just depends on where
Mm-hmm.
you are in the phase of your grief journey. But sometimes even approaching food is really hard, but we need that sustenance in our body. I remember again when my mom died, I could not eat I couldn't eat any kind of food, not even soft food. It just made me nauseous. But I was like, okay, I know I need something. So I drank protein drinks because I was like, I have to have something to fortify myself. So, yeah, I mean, unprocessed grief can be very, very damaging to us long term. And so, and as our body holds this trauma, our body is holding on to basically a chronic state of fight or flight, which is
Yeah.
pretty intense. So,
Couple thoughts on that as you were talking about the pressure cooker. I love metaphors, and my husband and I just
yeah.
watched Chernobyl on Netflix. And it's a 5-part series, but they show the building up in the core and then this massive explosion, and then there's rocks
Yeah.
flying and just debris everywhere. And
Hmm.
the particles from the core were highly radioactive. So one of the firefighters picked one of the rocks up because it was sparkly, and it almost burned all the way through his hand. So it just made me think about the fallout to that affects
Yes.
other people, even if we are not processing our grief well or at all,
Yes.
and the long-term damage. And it took over a year for them to encapsulate that, and it's still toxic within a 20-mile radius
Yeah.
of Chernobyl to this day. They
Wow.
say 100 years or more. It just made me think about, not only is it this insane event in our lives when we're
Hmm.
experiencing this deep, soul wrenching grief, but there's
Hmm.
fallout that affects other people too.
Hmm.
Mm.
So,
Totally.
Yeah.
yeah, important to do
Yeah.
that for ourselves and for others, like our children and our spouses
Oh,
and
yeah.
our, and
Yeah.
etc. Yeah.
Yeah. One of
Yeah.
the things when my kids lost their dad, they were in counseling, and I remember the counselor saying, "Hey, we have this thing called EMDR. Do you want your kids to have that?" I'm like, "Nope, that sounds woo woo. None of that." And quite honestly, well, just now it was such a disservice as a mom to my children. I didn't understand
Mm.
what EMDR would have done for my children.
Gosh,
And
yeah.
and so now they're,
Mm-hmm.
adults in their late 20s, and they're good. God is good, and God has taken them along their journey as God does.
Amen.
But all of that said, I think when we're going through grief, sometimes it can be really overwhelming to
Mm-hmm.
think of adding something else to our process, like processing grief. Sometimes we're just
Mm-hmm.
in that survival mode, and the thought of pressing in or listening
Mm-hmm.
to the grief can kind of seem overwhelming. But as you
Mm-hmm.
explained, if we don't, there are repercussions from that. So
Yes.
my sense is that there is this balance that we have to have between making room for it, pressing into it, and all the things that go with that. So how do we process grief in healthy ways? Like, what are the consequences of not processing at all? What would that look like? So help us understand a little bit about that balance of, okay, I am going through something, I don't have capacity for more. I think some people think grieving means I have to have more capacity. I have a feeling that you're going to
Right.
tell me
Yeah.
that that's not actually the truth. So will you explain a little bit about that for us?
Sure, absolutely. It's so interesting that you bring that up about the space and the timing of all of that, because a lot of the people that come to me are people who are referred to me by a primary care physician or physical therapists, because honest it's literally a prescription for them, because
Mm,
they're going to the doctor for all of these physical symptoms, but the doctor, if they're wise and in tune with what's really going on, is like, actually, I think if you took some time to work on this, you would find that your neck would not be doing this anymore. Um, in fact, actually, one of my recent clients, that was exactly her experience. She was having all this pain in her neck, and then she came to me and we worked it out. And she's like, "My neck it feels so much better right now." So it's almost like sometimes, I don't know about you ladies, but sometimes I struggle to give myself permission to do the things I know I need to do for myself. And
Mhm.
sometimes we just need someone to come alongside us and give us permission and say, actually, really think it would be beneficial if you took some time to look at this for what it really is, and it doesn't have to take a ton of time. um, so I think that the first crucial step in a healthy grief process is just acknowledgement, right? It's just saying, okay, I'm just gonna take a step back, and I see that my grief around this pain is not allowing me to be the woman I really want to be or the person I really want to be. I'm not showing up in a way that I feel like serves myself or serves the people around me, or it's not who God is really asking me to be ultimately. So it's just that acknowledgement. That's the first thing, and I honestly feel like that's the bravest step anybody could ever take, is just saying,
Absolutely.
I acknowledge and I need help, right? And then it is prioritizing the time to feel it, to process it. It's also telling yourself that, actually, I'm worth that. I am
mm,
worth making the space for. And if I do it for myself, I can show up better for other people. So it's really also saying, no, I deserve this. I think especially as women, we have this toxic trait of putting everybody else first and then, like, okay, I'll get to myself at the end.
mhm.
Well, it's almost reversing that narrative and saying the way to help everybody else is by putting myself first. And it actually is an act of love towards the people around me. So just really trying to reframe the reasons why it's very important for you to spend time on your grief and really feeling it and really acknowledging it and giving it space. Okay, now we're talking about TV shows, but I have to bring up another TV show,
Bring it.
because yeah, okay, there's this show on Apple TV called Shrinking, and it's
Yep.
completely
It's funny.
ridiculous. It's so silly. There are some parts where I'm like, "Oh, I don't fast forward that." But, it's a great show. And, it takes place in a therapist office. And I just love the advice that Harrison Ford gives to the main character's daughter, who's grieving the loss of her mom. But I think it applies to any kind of grief. He says, just grieve it for 15 minutes. And this
That's
is a
so
real
good.
theory. It's called the 15-minute theory. And it's just this idea that you will stop for 15 minutes and you will just feel it all the way. You can like no distractions, no, whatever, but you go into a space, or maybe you go for a walk, or you put on a song, or you do whatever you need to do, and you just enter into the grief all the way, but just for 15 minutes. You set a
Like you're
timer.
soaking in it. Like get in the hot
Yeah.
tub of the
Yeah.
grief and feel it all the way up.
Yes, you're just like, yes, you're just marinating in the feelings and letting them overcome you. You're not judging them, you're just letting it happen. And then when the timer goes off, you can wipe your eyes and you can move forward.
So
And
good.
it is amazing the researched response that that people have after doing something like that. The healing that comes of just taking those 15 minutes to really enter into the grief and really feel it for what it is, honoring it for what it is, and then moving forward, right? So
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be this thing, this monumental thing that you're feeling it all the time and you're just wallowing in grief. I don't even believe in that at all. I think that actually having moments of levity, having moments of laughter, or finding spaces where you can be joyful when you're also grieving is very important. You can't be grieving 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Again, that's not even healthy for your body, right? So finding ways where you're going to honor it, and then you're going to continue to move forward, being very gentle with yourself, being very patient with yourself, giving yourself more margin. um yeah, those are, I mean, I have other thoughts too, but I'll just share those for now.
I love the giving yourself margin. I assume that, like the act of forgiveness, that grief, even the 15-minute method, it's not a one and done. You might need
No.
to have repeated cycles, repeated times of
Mhm.
that, but also it's a both and, not an either
Mhm.
or. Either you're happy or
Mhm.
you're grieving.
That's right.
So you can grieve and be joyful and be
That's right.
peaceful and have all of
Yes.
those things in your life.
Yes, amen. And I really feel like, ooh, I just felt the spirit, but I just felt like it's so important for us as Christians to hold that tension, to be really respectful and gentle with other believers when they're grieving, because I think sometimes we can say things like, well, just keep praying about it or whatever, and that's kind of insensitive. We don't know the level of where someone's heart is at with their faith. I can have tremendous faith in God's goodness and the fact that he will show up for me and help me heal, and also be very painfully sad. Both of those things can be true. And it doesn't mean that I lack faith if I lean into my sadness. And it doesn't mean that
Thank you.
I
Yeah.
I believe less or I believe badly, quote unquote. It's just
Amen.
part of the whole faith journey. And I just think, especially as believers, we should be people who are the most sensitive when it comes to these topics of grief and infidelity and hurt and all of those things. We should be the most apt to hold people tenderly in those spaces, because that's what
Mhm.
God does for us.
Absolutely. And I can't think of a scripture off the top of my head, but I darn sure that God experiences grief, has
Yes.
experienced grief, lamenting. I mean, hello, he wrote a whole book
Oh,
about it,
yes.
Lamentations. So,
Yes.
yeah, God
Yes.
understands that and he knows it. I love what you were just touching on about things that people say, and that's something I wanted to ask you about
Oh,
is
yeah.
we can be so well intentioned and
Mhm.
so harmful and hurtful by saying the wrong things, like one of the
Mhm.
the common phrases when someone has died, or is that, oh, well, they're in a better place. Well,
Right.
that's not helpful.
Right.
That's not addressing. That's bypassing or sidelining what that
That's right.
person's experience. Or even when something tragic happens to another person, to say, well, God's in this, he's going to use it for your good. Thanks, that's
Oh,
great, but that's not
yeah.
addressing
Yeah.
the trauma that that person's in the moment. So could you
Yeah.
talk to us a little bit about some of the harmful things that people say, and how can we
Yeah.
better come alongside or hold space for someone
Yeah.
who has one of your buttons on?
Mhm. Yeah. Um, well, I will just say, like, right out of the gate, the whole trick with speaking to people who are going through traumatic, painful events and grief is to lead with your heart and not your head. So all of these statements, oh, you know, God just wanted another angel in heaven with him, or
Oh gosh.
I know. Don't start me.
Oh
I
my
get
word,
so,
that's the worst.
I am just
Yeah.
like, what Bible are you reading? Because first of all, I don't know that people turn into angels, but okay. And
I'm
Right.
pretty sure they
also,
don't. Yeah.
They
yeah,
don't.
thank you. And is God selfish that he takes from us like the way?
Right?
No, it's just so many things loaded in that. But we just need to lead with our heart and not our head. So we don't, what I'm saying is, people, when they're going through trauma, when they're going through grief, they're going through an all consuming emotional experience. But what we say are these intellectual cliched statements. And grievers don't have a broken brain, they have a broken heart. They're living in their
Ooh.
heart space. They're not living in their brain space. So lead with your heart and not your head. Think about how you'd like to be spoken to and then speak from that place. So, saying just give it time, that's not helpful. And it's also, again, that's not true either. Time is arbitrary. It doesn't necessarily heal in and of itself. It's what you do with the time that you've been given, right? You've already said this. Everything happens for a reason. God will, use it for good. God never gives you more than you can handle. All these things. Or, just be
That's not
thankful you
even in the
had.
Bible.
Thank
By the
you.
way,
That
God
isn't,
won't give you more
yeah.
than you can handle is not in scripture. Yeah.
Yeah, girl, tell it.
Yeah.
Tell it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Like, or just be thankful you had them for as long as you did or whatever. No, that is so dismissive. Like you said, Chris, it bypasses people's pain, it minimizes their pain, it almost writes it off, and then it also reinforces those toxic cultural myths around grief, that we don't want to perpetuate.
Well, how in the world do
So
we
I
process pain or grief if we justify it and label it? And then you
right,
set it on a shelf,
yeah,
and
Right.
yet it sits with you, but yet I've got this cognitive thought that it's this, you know
hmm
yeah, so I mean, it's not only is it dismissive, but I think it would be incredibly disruptive and maybe even harmful to your healing
yeah.
process to do that for yourself, because now we've just stuck it on a label, stuck it on a shelf. We don't touch it again, but yet it lives
Mhm.
inside of us, and now we're
Mhm.
conflicted with, well, they're
Yeah.
in heaven now, so I shouldn't feel this way. Now we've got a shame component going on, and yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, that's good. The
I
shame
love
piece
that
of
you
it.
said too, Hannah, that the only cure for grief is grieving. It's something
Yeah.
that's necessary, and it's
Yeah.
it's the only way to cure the ailment, right? Is to you
Yeah.
well, it's that quote, you gotta the only way out
The
is
only way
through.
out is through. Yeah. And I would say too that the truth is it's that you never get over the grief or, get past the grief. It's that you learn how to live with the grief, move through the grief.
Mhm.
You grow through the grief,
Mhm.
right? And so yeah, just
Mhm.
this notion that okay, I can put it away in a little box over there. That doesn't really make sense. That's and the truth is, especially, when you love something or loved somebody, you don't want to just put them in a box. You want to be able to feel free to remember the good things that you had with them or, that part in that season of your life with fondness. And that's part of the work again that I do is, moving it from the pain to more of that fondness feeling. Yeah, just trying to shove it away. Again, that leads back to that suppression that we talked about earlier. That's just really toxic and not helpful. So I think when we are approaching people who have traumatic experiences and are grieving, we show up in our humanity, which is exactly what
Mm.
Christ is for us. He showed up as in human form for us. We can show up in human form for other people. So I think, things we can say are, my heart is breaking with you over your loss. That's a very human thing to say.
Mm.
I don't know exactly what you're going through, because we do say, oh, I know exactly how you feel. Well, we don't actually know exactly how someone else is feeling. So I don't know exactly what you're going through, but I know I love you and I'm here if you ever want to talk.
Good.
I think also asking
Yeah.
people who have been like going through painful things, what do you need? What can I do for you? How can I serve you? Even if it's just taking out the trash or washing your dishes. I mean, goodness gracious, that would be such a gift to give to some people. I think another thing that always goes well, and it's kind of funny because every time I say this, I always get a response. But I always tell people that are going through hard things, I send them a little message and I say, hey, there's no pressure to respond. I just want you to know I'm thinking about you and I'm holding space for you. It's by giving them the permission to just be wherever they are, that always elicits a response from people because no one else is doing that. No one else is saying, like,
What a
hey, you don't have
gift.
to respond. Yeah, you don't have to show up. I have zero expectations for you right now as you're going through this really painful thing. I just want you to know I love you.
Mm.
All of that takes pressure off a person who has gone through something so traumatic and painful, and it allows us to hold space for them. It allows us to love them well. So I think just remembering that grievers aren't broken, so they don't need to be fixed.
Ah,
When we go through
good.
traumatic events, right? When we
Thank you
go through
for
traumatic
that.
events, yes,
Oh,
yes. When
that
our
was
partner cheats on us, or we discover that they've had like a porn addiction for years and we didn't know about it, and our response is one of hurt and heartbreak and anger and all the things, that is normal and natural. No one needs to fix you. It's actually healthy that you have that response, and it's just part of the process, right? So we just need to hold people in that. That's not a broken
mhm.
response. That's actually the normal and healthy response. So I would just encourage people to take cues from the grieving person, the person who's going through the event, and not put your own experiences or expectations or
So
ideas
good.
on that person.
Yes.
I love that. I I love the phrase I'm comfortable with someone else being uncomfortable. I feel like we need to resist the urge, like you were saying, to fix someone in a way. For me
Yeah.
personally, I feel like when I've been tempted
Hmm.
to do that with someone who's grieving whatever loss they've experienced, it's selfish on my behalf. Like I need them to be okay so I can be okay, which is kind of
Hmm.
codependent.
Yes.
And I've learned to be comfortable with other people being in a hard or uncomfortable place, and they need to do that. If I prematurely come in and codependently rescue them, then they're not going to have that learning opportunity. They're not going to be able to go through that process of grieving and all of the neurological things that take place in that
Yes.
process, and all of the body, issues that are going on with them. I'm cutting short their process, which is not kind at all or helpful.
Yeah.
So I love that you keep
Yeah.
highlighting the fact that we don't need to fix someone who is grieving. We just need to hold space for them, come alongside, and ask them what they need.
Mm.
Ah,
How can I show
amen.
up for you? And
Yeah.
just check on them every once in a while. I love that you said,
Yeah.
I'll send a message or leave a note, send a card, and say, feel no pressure to respond to me. I just want you to know I love you and
Mhm.
I'm here for you.
Yes, that reminds me of two things. When people go through grief and then they have like the initial thing happens, and then a few months later, everybody else moves on,
Mm.
and but you're not moving on. And I think it's important, especially if it's somebody that we're close to and we really love, we really claim this person as a person in our life. I think for us as friends and family around them, to set reminders to check in on them.
Yes,
Check in
yes.
on them 6 months later, a
Yeah.
year later,
Yeah.
check on them 2 years later on
Yeah.
the day that around the time it
Yes.
happened, because maybe, again, we all are busy people, we all move on, but it's not as maybe the grief isn't as intense as in that one moment,
Mm.
but maybe around the anniversary of that thing happening or that timing, all of those same feelings come right back. And so just being mindful of those anniversaries or those opportunities to play the long game with our friends and to really
Mhm.
to long suffer with the people we love, right? That
Yeah.
Oh, that's
in
great
time, over
advice.
time, those wounds will still resurface. And so as we hold space for them, let's hold space for them over the duration and not just in that immediate moment,
I love
if
that.
that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. I
Absolutely.
had a friend last year whose husband went through something tragic, and in my phone, Fridays at 7 p.m. for an entire year, I put it on
Yes.
repeat for an entire year to text message her. I don't know what that did for her, but we're still in touch to this day. This is a friend that I had lost
Mm,
contact with, heard about this tragedy, put that text message or put that note in my calendar as a reminder. And so we're still in contact to this day. And
I
that's
love it.
that's a really, really good reminder. I think just like you said, to hold space for someone, but to do it consistently and for a long length of
Hmm.
time. That's
Hmm.
a big, big one.
Yeah.
Something
Yeah.
else that's coming to mind as we move forward with our content here is I remember I used to
Hmm.
love to sing, love to harmonize. I just worshiping in church, just all of
Yeah.
that has been a huge piece of my faith and my faith
Yeah.
experience. And
Hmm.
I remember I could not utter a note. I couldn't I'd listen to music and I tried to sing along and I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
utter. It was so
Mm-hmm.
painful, and let alone go to
Mm-hmm.
church and join
Mm-hmm.
in worship there, because then I'd be a blubbering mess on the floor, and I don't want
Right.
to draw attention to myself, and my
Right.
situation's so precarious that I definitely don't want to draw attention to myself or my
Yeah.
circumstances. And I remember I feel like I lost my song, if you will,
Mm.
for about
Yeah.
2 years.
Yeah.
I could
Mm-hmm.
not sing, even
Yep.
even at home with worship
Mm-hmm.
music. I could
Mm-hmm.
put on worship music and listen to it and grieve and cry and process. I could experience the emotions as I listened to it, but I could not let the song come out. And I remember at one point I started to sing again and it was so noticeable. I was like, "Holy smokes."
Yeah.
I Something had lifted enough that my
Yeah.
vocal cords could open and I could sing again. So
Yep.
could you tell us a little bit about how music affects our grief and what
Yeah.
role that plays?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Jen, I recognize myself in that story for sure. Twice. I think the first time was when my dad, I think when I moved here from the East Coast and really just grieving my dad and just grieving the loss of trust, the betrayal. It's a betrayal, right? It's that. It's like you're the person who's supposed to look out for me and you're the person who's caused me the most pain.
Mm.
I didn't sing for years. I just could not sing. And same with my mom. When my mom died, I took a year off of worship and I just was like, I can't do it. I just like not like I agree. It's like the song in you is just muted. But I think I believe that music is such a powerful gift from God. When I think about God right now in the heavens, like he's surrounded by music. People are singing around him. Like so and when I lead people in worship, I think about that and just how we're joining that heavenly song whenever we're singing as believers. And so there's that element of music. But then I also believe that music is warfare. Music
Mm.
helps empower us. It helps us stake claims and God's promises over our hearts and our lives. And so in that way, it's very powerful too. And I just think whenever I lead worship at church, I hold both of those things in tension of we are joining the heavenly song that is constantly going, that God is surrounded in song and worship and that beauty, but then we're also declaring through music because I believe that music has its own specific soul language. It's almost like a form of speaking in tongues, if you will. Like it's got
Amen.
this its
Yeah.
own power, right?
Mm.
That when we speak that way, we're also declaring things in the spiritual that we don't even realize.
Good.
And so it makes perfect sense to me that when we're grieving, when we're broken down, when we are betrayed and on our knees and everything is in question, it makes sense to me that it's hard to enter into that spiritual language almost. And I think then that music affects our grief or shows up in our grief in two ways. So it can stir up feelings of it's almost it's connected to our memory, right? So it stirs up, oh man, it's like you can hear that song and you're almost transported back into time and a different place where maybe things were happier or good, or maybe it's your song with your person, your partner, and it transports you right back there and you feel all the feelings you felt in that sweet time or that sweet moment, and then you open your eyes and you realize like, okay, that's not today.
Mm-mm.
And then all
Mm.
of a sudden we're a wreck,
Yep.
and I think that music in that sense triggers our grief, but I think again that's okay because it's important for us to feel those feelings. Grief comes in layers and it comes in waves. So that's just I feel like music can stir up one of those waves of grief when we least expect it. We can be in the grocery store looking at like pasta and then the song comes
Yes.
on and
Yes.
you're like, shoot, I gotta leave now. I think that actually did happen to me. I was like, I have to leave. I can't be in the store. Like I'm feeling all these feels. So that's one aspect. But then I also think music brings us profound comfort. And music got me through the loss of my mom and so many other things. And in the singing again, I found a big part of my healing. And so I just think that it's being aware of the former, it's being aware that music can be a source of triggering for us with our grief and our loss, but it also can usher us into God's grace and help us really experience His presence and His healing. And I also, this is a total tangent, but I want the church because I remember too when my mom died, I wanted to avoid the church. And that makes me so sad. I
Mm.
want the church to be a place where the brokenhearted can come, and I can come broken down, discovering that my partner has betrayed me, and I can come there and I can fall on my knees and cry and just be like, cool, that's normal. That's good.
Yeah.
God is meeting her in that place. I want that for the church. I don't know what we have to do to get there. This is a tangent, but I just have to
Oh,
say that.
you're preaching. I just want a button now that says normalize grieving.
Yes,
Right?
right? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
God came for the sick, not the whole, not the perfect, right? And I feel like in our church spaces it's so often about being the perfect and not being the sick, but sometimes we're hurt.
It is
So,
so true. That's exactly the reason why my husband and I left the church that we were at when all of his stuff came out. What I discovered in my personal journey was people love the story when you're all through it and there's a nice little bow on
mhm.
top of it. In that time, the church was not a safe or healing place for us to be real
Mhm.
and raw. So
Mhm.
we ended up going to a different church, and that church knows their tagline, if you will, is being relentlessly real. And this is a
Mm.
church where you can go and get really real, and that brings in all kinds of people, I gotta say.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah,
lot of
for sure.
realness there. um, but there is something incredibly powerful when the church decides that they can take on the mess, when they can run towards the mess without fear, without preaching, without over spiritualizing, without spiritual bypassing,
Yeah.
all of those things. That is a special, special place to be. And we
Amen.
are the church. So it starts here. It starts with the three of us,
Mhm.
and it starts to every
Mhm.
listener who's listening to this. We
Mhm.
are the church.
Amen.
Christ is in us, the Holy Spirit is in us, and so it
Amen.
starts with us. So I don't know how to do it on a grand scale, but
Right.
not all of us are called to do it on a grand scale. We
That's
are
right.
called to do it in relationship to those that we encounter that are going through grief. My tangent. Hello.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's not a
Good
tangent. This
word.
is so good. It's the adage too of be the firefighter that
Mhm.
runs in
Mhm.
when everyone else is running out.
Yeah,
Be
yes.
comfortable,
Mhm.
going to the messy, going to the hard, and yeah, run in when everyone else is running out.
Yeah.
Amen. No, I agree completely. I love that. And thank you for acknowledging that tangent because I think it is important and saying, like, it does start with us. It's my choice to show up with my neighbor next
Yes.
to me. And, when they ask me how I am, being
Mhm.
honest myself
Mhm.
and also being willing to sit and listen to how they are and being a safe space for them. So you're absolutely right about that, sis. Amen.
Amen. Yeah. Well said, ladies.
Yeah.
You kind of already answered the next question I was going to ask you. So, and I love it because I just love this conversation so much. But Hannah, can you give us, for the griever, can
Yeah.
you give us a few more ideas about self care? How can that
Oh,
person show up well
yeah.
for themselves in the process of
Hmm.
grief?
Yeah. You know, when I, so before I was a grief coach, I did a lot of life coaching, but particularly around boundaries. And I love boundaries. And I know a lot of people do not love boundaries because they think it's a confrontational or a conflict driven thing. But when boundaries are done well or from a healthy place, they're a very proactive, empowering thing. And they never have to be offensive to the other person. And so I just really believe for people who are going through grief, extreme pain, extreme betrayal, doubling down on your boundaries and being very clear on them is so important. And not apologizing for them either, because I think a lot of people want to put on us what their expectations are of us in a certain time or place. And I think that when we're going through something hard, it's very important for us to just take a beat to listen to what it is that we really need and then ask for that from the people around us, which I know is really hard, but really important. And then if the people around us cannot honor that, it's also saying, okay, well, I'll see you when I see you. Like
Mhm.
I gotta get some space because I really have to take care of myself right now. I really have to come around myself. I'm also thinking for, women particularly in the betrayal trauma space where the trauma, and Jen, maybe you can speak to this too, but like the trauma doesn't just happen to you. Like it also happens to your kids. They're part of the fallout of what happened. And so again, we talked about this a little bit, but you have to take care of yourself and take care of the other people that are affected
Yes.
by the scenario, right? And so you can't, again, that's where I feel like those boundaries come in of like, it's going to be enough work for me to take care of me and to take care of these little people who are involved in this, or maybe they're big at that point, or the other people who are directly impacted. So just, I would just really say like leaning hard if you can into the space of boundaries and really saying this is what I need. It's okay right now if you can't give that to me as a friend or whatever. I love you. It doesn't mean that we're not going to be friends in a later space, but right now this is what I need. I feel like that's important. I don't really feel like that answers your self-care question.
I think that
It
that
does.
we made our circle very, very small. So my
Mhm.
first marriage didn't make it, but my second marriage has. And when Dan and I were going through our process, we made that circle so, so, so small. We pulled out of everything we
Good.
possibly could, every ministry, every friendship.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, we probably only had really, I would say probably maybe only two friends, maybe
Mhm.
four at the most, while we were going through it. Because it is an emotional roller coaster, and you take people on an emotional roller
Mhm.
coaster. Some of them really go with you with the emotions, and now you're starting to have to manage their responses.
That's
And
right.
so there isn't much capacity, so really pulling back. And when you talk boundaries, that's what I'm hearing, at least for myself.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
um, pull back from as much as you possibly can to focus on what you really need to have energy for.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well, and
I
it bears
agree completely.
repeating something that you've said before, Jen, that boundaries keep love in, not out. We're not
Mm.
building a, a, a cinder block wall 10 feet thick and barricading ourselves behind it. We're putting needs out there, like you say, speak the need, identify the need, speak the need.
Mhm.
And when we do that with boundaries, it helps us to maintain relationships with people as opposed to not speaking our need, letting them do whatever, and then minimizing our needs and being hurt. So
Yeah.
boundaries
Mhm.
m-
Mhm.
add to our relationships. They're good for our
Not just our
relationships.
relationships with others, but our relationship with ourselves. Like we have to exercise the
Yes,
Absolutely.
internal boundary. We're not just
that's
putting
right.
external boundaries. We have to do the internal ones, which is also
That's right.
recognizing our
Yes.
own internal needs. I keep thinking this analogy keeps coming to mind. This car
Wait,
that
I
is
like the cat one
the
better. Can
cat
we go with cat? No,
meow.
I'm kidding.
I just meowed on a podcast. Okay, but here
I love it.
but I keep thinking of this car, like we're, let's say someone doesn't have a license and we're driving them from place to place to place. We're doing our lives, but our lives are somewhat disrupted with their schedule. So we're trying to take people from place to place to place in this car, and our car's running out of gas.
Mhm.
And we have this acknowledgement: I need to get gas. I need to get gas. I need to get gas.
Yes.
And the tank's getting
Yes.
lower and lower and lower. And it's on empty. And you're like, how far can I get on fumes? All right, fumes of
Yes.
faith. Like here we. And so I keep thinking about how even just putting a little bit of gas in your car,
Mhm.
you may not have the money to fill it up, all the way, but even just putting a half a tank, a quarter tank,
Yeah.
will take you to
Amen.
where you need to go. Because once you run out of gas, you will
Mhm.
not have the ability to serve those around you, even
That's
your
right.
children.
That's
So
right.
there has to be this internal boundary and acknowledgement of my need to fill my tank just a little so that I can
Yeah.
continue to do the things that I really want to do and feel called to do, which is to
Mhm.
serve those closest to me. But you have to
Amen.
refill your tank. And so that internal boundary is
Mhm.
necessary for that. So we've talked about coming alongside, grieving as a result of betrayal and how to hold space for people. I appreciate your input on that. Is there
Yeah.
anything that you want to add, Hannah, as we are coming to a close here? Any word of encouragement for our listeners, or final thoughts, or anything you felt like you wanted to touch on but didn't have a chance to?
Yeah. A couple things. First, one way that we continue to hold space for each other is just we honor the fact that every relationship is unique, and so therefore every grief and every griever is unique. So
Mm-hmm.
even, people listening to this podcast, maybe the betrayal trauma is the thing that we have in common, but how that manifested in our life is so unique. And so let's just honor each person's experience, their relationship, and what their loss is and how they're grieving it. And I also really want to encourage people who are wrestling with betrayal trauma that to not compare or minimize their grief.
Yeah.
I think it would be so easy for me to say, okay, well, my husband, I just, discovered this thing. But my friend over here's mom's dying of cancer, or dad's dying of cancer. I feel like I can't say my thing or share my thing because it's not
Yeah.
as severe as that. No, all grief is real and valid, and each person is going through what is their own unique battle and struggle. And for them, it's enough. And so I don't know. I just feel like there's someone listening who just needs to know that don't feel bad and don't minimize your own experience just because maybe society or other people say it's not as severe as someone else's. It's your experience. It is valid. It is
Mm-hmm.
painful. And
Mm-hmm.
you are allowed to grieve that at 100% of your own personal capacity. And just know that is the honorable and worthy thing to do. And I just think it's important to just hold space for all different kinds of grief and just to listen and hold that person with love. So I just feel like there's someone out there who could maybe benefit from that word. I'll just say by way of closing, and I just say this to almost every woman I meet because I just think we all need to hear this, but you are loved, you are worthy, you are enough. Everything that you're experiencing is normal and natural, and there are safe spaces out here for you to process that. I'm grateful for you, Chris, and for you, Jen, that you've created this safe space for people who are going through betrayal trauma because it's unique and it deserves its own unique recognition. And so I just am grateful that you're holding space for them just by even having this dialogue. And I just know too that God holds space for us in all of our pain. He doesn't judge us, and He's not mad at us as we're wrestling through different challenges around the trauma. He loves us. He absolutely grieves with us. His heart breaks with us. I mean, I think that the ultimate truth is that the world right now is not as he originally designed it. And so
Yeah.
that brings him sorrow too, which is why he sent his son to come and rescue us and to make it right, right? And eventually it will all be made right one day. And so I just want to encourage us. It's so easy for us to be hard on ourselves and think that God is hard on us too in our pain, but he's not. He's just sitting there with so much love and compassion and understanding for us. And so I want to speak that over someone's heart too, that God grieves with you. He's not his heart breaks
He's
over
mad
your
too. He's
situation.
mad too.
Yeah. He is.
Yeah.
He is. He is.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
he's sad
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Hannah. That was
You're
precious and beautiful,
welcome.
and
Yeah.
yes and amen. And I'm, I know my friend Jen well, and I can see the look on her face, and I can say, I can boldly speak for her as well in
Hmm.
saying that we're huge fans of yours,
Mhm.
and we're also
Oh, you're so
grateful
sweet.
for we're so grateful for the work that you do with people
Thank
who are
you.
grieving, and also leading people into that space of worship, which is another thing that you do amazingly well. And
Yeah.
and worship as a weapon is a powerful thing when we're ready to pick
That's
that
right.
up and go
That's
for it.
right.
So thank you so much for the
Amen.
education you gave us and our listeners
Yeah.
today. Hannah, tell our listeners how they can reach you. Where can they contact you? What's your
Yeah.
social handles? All that good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, they can reach me at hannahwachter.com. So that's my website. I'm sure you'll spell it all out in the notes, so I won't bother spelling my
I
last
will.
name there. But yeah, hannahwachter.com. And then my email address is heyhey@hannahwachter.com. More like hey hey, like that.
So
And
cute.
then
Love it.
and then
I'm so sad I
my
didn't think of that.
you can do it. I'll share it with you.
Okay. All right.
Um Yeah, and then my Instagram, I think I'm on LinkedIn and a couple other social platforms, but I would say that the one that I am most active on is Instagram, and my handle there is Stay Royal Queen, all one word, Stay Royal Queen. So, yeah, that's where you can find me. DM me. Just happy to like be in a shared space with anybody and love on them and encourage them however I can.
Beautiful. So powerful.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Hannah.
Thank you, ladies, for this opportunity. Seriously, I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. We'd love to have you back in the future. So put
Yes,
a pin in
please.
that. We'll be in touch.
Okay.
So, friends, if you found these conversations helpful, please consider subscribing, rating, and sharing this podcast with others. Your actions might just be a lifeline for others seeking help, encouragement, and support. For more updates, insight, and community engagement, be sure to follow us on social media. Find us on Instagram at the.brt.podcast. And we have a private Facebook group as well called Betrayal Recovery Transformation for Christian Women, and we'd love to see you there.
Yes, thank you, listeners, for tuning in and being a part of our podcast community. Your support is valuable, and we're here to serve you. Remember that healing is a journey, not a destination. And as we navigate the path of recovery and transformation together, know that you're never alone. Stay strong, stay hopeful, and keep working toward your brighter, empowered future. And until next time, take good care and keep embracing your healing journey.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Betrayal Recovery Transformation Podcast with your hosts, Chris Rocha and Jen Howie. We hope you've been helped and encouraged. If you value the content we shared today, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review. This helps others find the show. Need personalized guidance? Please contact Chris or Jen for transformative coaching. This episode has been brought to you by healingwiththehowies.com, watermarkcoach.com, and with the support of Pure Life Alliance Ministries.